This year, Motorola released their first budget folding phone. Seeing the price and the specs of the device brought a few questions to mind. Is the Razr the best option for a budget folding phone? Is it the only option? Well, not quite. It's still possible to get a Z Flip 4 brand new, and since it's over a year old, it's now at a lower price. So how does the Z Flip 4 compare to the Razr? I can't quite compare the build quality of the Razr since I haven't really held it in my hands, but I think it's safe to assume that it's not going to be better than the Razr Plus. Using the Razr Plus and the Z Flip 5 as stand-ins, I can at least compare the feel of the outside materials, and that's the fake leather versus the glass. The Razr is mostly wrapped in this leather material, and that's a positive for me because it's grippy and soft, and it makes me feel more comfortable when I'm using it without a case. Glass, on the other hand, is a little too slippery. Another difference is the water and dust resistance. Not everyone's going to agree on which one is more important, but they both have their pros and cons. The Razr has IP52 water and dust resistance, so the 5 means that it has some additional resistance to dust, and the 2 means that it has just a basic water resistance, which is splashing. On the other side, the Z Flip 4 has an IPX8 rating, so it has no rating for dust whatsoever. Doesn't mean it can't handle dust, but it's not certified. And then the 8 means that it can be submerged in water. So it has better water resistance, while the Razr has better dust resistance. Determining which rating is better is really up to the individual person. For me, I do prefer the water resistance or the waterproof over the dust resistance. I haven't really seen where dust has been an issue for me, and even though I haven't had any issues with water resistance or needing water resistance, I do spend a lot of time around water, so I do prefer to have that rating. The next item is more objective, and it's going to be easier to determine which one is the better one. So the Razr has the Snapdragon 7 Generation 1, and the Z Flip 4 has the Snapdragon 8 Plus Generation 1. Right off the bat, the clock speed on the 7 Generation 1 is 2.4 versus the 3.19 of the Z Flip 4, and that's already a huge difference in clock speed. I don't know which chip is really going to be more efficient, but that's not really going to matter after the next category. Moving on to the battery, there is a pretty large gap between these two phones, and that's about 500 milliamp hours. So the Z Flip 4 is running with a 3700 milliamp hour battery, and the Razr is running with a 4200 milliamp hour battery. I don't think there's any way that the Z Flip 4 can keep up in terms of battery life. Doesn't matter how efficient it runs compared to the Razr, just because of that massive battery difference. The Razr's battery capacity actually puts it in the same ballpark as the regular non-folding phones, which is pretty impressive in my book. Next, let's go over the RAM, and this could be a little bit tricky because, for starters, they both start at 8 gigabytes of RAM, which is about normal, the average, but the Razr has the option to go up to 12 gigabytes of RAM. The thing is that once you go up to 12 gigabytes of RAM, it's going to be more expensive than the Z Flip 4. So there's a bit of a trade-off there. The 12 gigabytes of RAM might actually be very important for the Razr. The reason I say that is because it also has a slower storage speed. The Razr is using the UFS 2.2 storage speeds, while the Z Flip 4 is using the UFS 3.1. But even with the lower RAM, I'm confident that the Z Flip 4 is going to perform better in pretty much every situation than the Razr. Next, I want to talk about the camera, which is one of the most important topics for me. The Z Flip 4, even though it's not on par with the regular slate phones, is pretty good for a flip phone. It even gives competition to the regular slate phones, honestly. It takes really good pictures. The biggest limitation is that it has a smaller sensors, so it's not gonna be as clear as those, but overall the output is pretty great on this phone. And obviously the video comes out really steady. Yeah, you'll get some noise because of the smaller sensor and all these different things, but you're gonna have steady video and it's gonna have good color and stabilization. For the Razr, on the other hand, after a quick search, you can really see that it's not good at photos, and it's even worse with video. The Razr Plus, which is going to perform better, it still performs worse than the Z Flip 4 and Z Flip 5. Now we're moving on to charging, and this one is a bit of a give and take. So the Z Flip 4 has better wireless charging at 15 watts, while the Razr has the wireless charging at 5 watts. That's triple the speed really in charging. So in that aspect, the Z Flip 4 comes out on top. Now we move over to wired charging. The Z Flip 4 is charging at 25 and the Razr at 30. Not as much of a difference, but the Razr still comes out on top because it's charging faster. Now for me, I think that Razr is gonna provide the better balance between the two because they're both, you know, I guess decent, especially for the battery size. The Razr does provide the good wired charging, but the wire is gonna be a bit slow. So if you heavily rely on wireless and you actually use it to top off the phone as quickly as possible, this one might be a bit limiting. If you just use wireless charging overnight like I do, the 5 watts is not gonna make a difference, so this is fine. So it really depends on what you want to use it for. Now let's take a look at the screen brightness. So the Razr is showing on paper that it's brighter than the Z Flip 4, so that is a plus. The only thing is that I wouldn't count Samsung out because Samsung does some screen magic where their screens behave like brighter screens do. Even in more recent examples with the Z Fold 5 and the OnePlus Open, the difference in brightness is pretty substantial. So the Z Fold 5, I mean, I'm sorry, I know they're completely different phones, but just an example of how Samsung works and why these numbers don't always translate 100%. The Z Fold 5 is rated at 1750 max brightness or peak brightness, and the OnePlus Open is rated at 2800 peak brightness, if I remember correctly. And when you go outside, the Z Fold 5 looks as bright or possibly even brighter in the direct sunlight. So it doesn't really translate to being able to use it outdoors all that much because, again, Samsung just does some really magical stuff with their screens. And since we're on the topic of screens, I want to cover the cover screen, I guess. So both of these phones have the same style of cover screen where you only have enough space for like notifications and maybe some quick settings here and there. The difference is it looks like Motorola really did a better job in implementing the smaller screen or getting used to the smaller screen compared to the Z Flip 4. But either way, the front screen is basically just going to be used for some quick settings and notifications. It's not going to be anything like the Z Flip 5 and the Razr Plus. To me, one of the major benefits of getting a new budget phone versus an older flagship phone is that you would probably get, more OS updates and more security patches. But that's not always the case, especially when it's only a 1-year difference. With the Razr, you get 3 OS updates and 4 years of security patches. And with the Z Flip 4, when it's brand new, you get 4 OS updates and 5 years of security patches. Now that the Z Flip 4 is a year old, maybe actually a little bit over a year old, it kind of puts it in the same ballpark as the Razr, funny enough. The price difference is surprisingly close too. So the Razr is, at the time of this recording, selling for $499, and at the time of this recording, the Z Flip 4 is selling for $539 on Amazon. So really, a $40 difference is not much when in the phone world, and especially when you're comparing a previous premium versus a mid-range budget, $40 doesn't seem all that important. So at this point in time, with the prices that I'm seeing these phones, I will be inclined to go with the Z Flip 4 because you're getting that premium phone for the same price as a budget phone, and you're not really missing out on much because you have pretty much all the features matching up, except for the hardware specs. The hardware specs are much better on the Z Flip 4 versus the Razr, with the exception of the battery. And that's going to make a big difference in the user experience, really. There will be things that the Razr does better than the Samsung. It's really up to each individual person, but I would be inclined to get the Z Flip 4. Which of the 2 phones would you get? Let me know in the comments. I hope you enjoyed the video. A like and subscribe will be greatly appreciated. And as always, I'll see you on the next one.